Somewhere in the back half of this story, a woman is going to say two words out loud, and you are going to think you know what they mean. She says them into a phone, in a parking lot, at 4 in the morning, and she says them the way you say a thing you have been holding under your tongue for years. The Reaper. That was his call sign in Kandahar. You already built a picture. I know you did, because I did too, the first time somebody told me this one. A rifle, a scope, a number painted on the side of something. You are wrong. Every single person in this story was wrong about it, including the people who were counting on being right. And the fact that they were wrong is the only reason a 9-year-old boy is alive today and sitting in a 4th grade classroom in Tennessee. I'm Nathan. I want you to hold that wrong picture in your head on purpose for the next 40 minutes, because this story is built on it. 3 people bet everything they had on knowing exactly what kind of man they had married into. They knew his unit. They knew the deployments. They knew the nickname. They planned around the man they thought that nickname described, and they did it well. Well enough that a county sheriff, a search command post, and 76 hours of daylight all came out on their side. What none of them ever bothered to look up is what an 18 Delta actually does. Stay with the water temperature in this one. Everything turns on the water temperature. The call came at 3:04 in the morning, and Marlin Coldiron was awake before the second ring because he had been sleeping at 3/4 volume for 21 years and had long ago stopped pretending that would change. The voice said Tennessee Highway Patrol. It asked him to confirm his name, and then it asked him to confirm his relationship to Wilburn Coldiron, and it was that second question that put his feet on the floor. Because troopers do not ask you to confirm a relationship at 3 in the morning for a good reason. Webb Coldiron was 61 years old and he was Marlin's half-brother, and calling him that has always felt like a lie of proportion. Webb was 18 years older. Their mother had died when Marlin was 4 and Webb was 22, and Webb had come home from a job on a pipeline in Wyoming, unpacked one duffel bag, and simply never left again. He raised Marlin in a 2-bedroom house on Bardsley Landing Road, with a wood stove and a window unit and a rule about homework. And for the entire 39 years since, he had called Marlin, without exception, and without any apparent awareness that it was odd, son. The trooper said Webb had been found on the county launch ramp at 12:50 a.m. by a man putting in a John boat to run trot lines. He said Webb had 2 gunshot wounds. He said he was at Quillian Regional in surgery, and that he had been conscious in the ambulance, and that he had said something to the paramedic, and that the paramedic had written it down. Marlin asked the trooper to read it to him. The trooper hesitated, and Marlin, in the flat, unhurried, slightly too calm voice that people in his line of work develop, said the sentence that ended the hesitation. He said, "Trooper, I'm a retired 18 Delta. I've written down more of those than you have. Read it to me." The trooper read it. "Son, I saw your wife and her father loading something into the boat. Your boy hasn't been seen since Tuesday. They saw me on the dock. Her father shot me twice." Marlin Coldiron was standing in a rental apartment in Fayetteville, North Carolina, at 3:06 in the morning, 940 miles from Waddington Lake, and he did the thing he had been trained to do, which is that he did not react to the first thing. He reacted to the worst thing. He did not say, "What do you mean, my wife?" He did not say her father shot you. He said, "Since Tuesday. What day is it right now?" The trooper said it was early Saturday morning. Marlin looked at the clock on the microwave and did the arithmetic, and it came out to a number that would not leave his head for the next 11 hours. 76. 76 hours since anybody had seen his son. He asked one more question, and it was a question the trooper did not understand at all. And later, much later, in a deposition, that trooper said it was the strangest question he had ever been asked by a family member, and that he thought at the time the man on the phone was in shock and rambling. Marlin asked, "What's the surface temperature of that lake right now?" Here is the thing you need to understand about Marlin Coldiron before we go any further, because if you do not understand it, the rest of this story looks like luck, and none of it was luck. He was Special Forces. He was 18 Delta, a Special Forces medical sergeant. Every A-team has 2 of them, and in the popular imagination, the medic is the guy who tapes you up and calls for the helicopter. That is a small and misleading fraction of the job. An 18 Delta runs a battalion aid station's worth of medicine out of 2 rucksacks in a place with no hospital, no lab, no imaging, and frequently no helicopter for 6 hours. He does surgery he is not supposed to be able to do. He runs a clinic for a village of 400 people because the nearest doctor is 110 kilometers away over a road nobody wants to drive. And when there are more casualties than there are hands, he does the other thing. He triages. Triage is the coldest arithmetic that exists in medicine, and it is the specific arithmetic that this whole story turns on, so I want to lay it out clean. When you have 5 people down and 2 sets of hands, you do not treat the loudest, and you do not treat the worst. You sort. You walk the line and you put a tag on every single person, and the tag is a color, and the color is a decision. Green is walking wounded. They can wait. They will be fine. Yellow is delayed. Hurt badly, will live an hour, gets treated second. Red is immediate. This person dies in the next few minutes without you, and lives if you get to them. Red is where you spend everything you have. And black is expectant, beyond your capability. You are going to walk past this person, and they are going to know you walked past them, and you are going to do it anyway, because the 2 red tags behind them are still savable, and your hands are the only hands. In Kandahar in 2011, at a casualty collection point behind a compound wall, Master Sergeant Marlin Coldiron sorted 31 casualties in 19 minutes across 2 rotary wing lifts. He assigned 4 black tags. 3 of those 4 were men he knew by their first names. I want to give you that afternoon properly, because the nickname is the hinge of this story, and a nickname without its afternoon is just a word. A vehicle-borne device had gone into a district center at 10 past 2. The compound wall was the only cover for 60 meters. Casualties came in on trucks, on doors, in the arms of other people, in no order at all, 31 of them across about 9 minutes, and there were 2 medics and 2 rotary wing lifts inbound with a combined capacity of 14. 14 seats, 31 people. That is the whole problem, and it is a problem with no good answer, only a correct one. Marlin walked the line with a roll of tags and a black marker, and he did not stop moving. He did not kneel. Kneeling is how a triage officer becomes a treatment officer, and a triage officer who starts treating, stops sorting, and everybody behind him dies. He looked. He touched 2 places. He said a time out loud, and he moved. He said things like, 20 minutes. He said, he's got 2 hours, leave him. He said, once, to a man he had eaten breakfast with for 4 months, brother, I'm going to come back to you. And he did not come back to him, and both of them knew it when he said it. The 2 lifts went out full. 27 of the 31 lived. That number, in that situation, is extraordinary, and every person who was behind that wall knows it, and none of them ever felt good about it, which is the correct amount to feel. A young captain named Rulon Amberson, who had never seen it done before, and who threw up afterward behind a HESCO barrier, said the thing in the debrief that stuck and became the call sign. He said, he walked down that line and he told every single one of them exactly how long they had, and he was right about every one of them. He's a damn Reaper. That is what it meant. That is all it ever meant. The Reaper was not the man who decided who died. The Reaper was the man who could look at a body and tell you, to the minute, how much time was left in it, and who was therefore the only man on that entire lake who was going to be able to answer a question that the sheriff of Netherton County had already decided did not need to be asked anymore. Waddington Lake sits across Netherton County, Tennessee, in a shape somebody once described as a hand with too many fingers, and it exists because in 1962 the Radliff Dam closed, and the water came up over 16,000 acres of the Wolf Kiln River Valley. There were 3 towns in that valley. 2 of them were moved. The third one was called Pentecost, and Pentecost was a settlement of maybe 90 people, and the money to relocate it ran out, and what the utility did instead was buy the land, condemn what it could not buy, and let the water come. At full summer pool, Pentecost is under 51 feet of water, but Waddington is a flood control reservoir, and every winter the utility draws it down about 22 feet, and when the lake goes to winter pool, things come back. Foundations, a road, 2 chimneys, a short section of iron bridge rail. and the top 9 feet of the bell tower of the Pentecost Methodist Church, which sticks out of the water like a brick finger from the second week of November to the first week of April, and which every single child raised on that lake has been told, by every single adult on that lake, to stay away from. Marlin Coldiron grew up 10 miles from that steeple. He met Adele Wingfield at a marina fuel dock when he was 28 and home on leave, and she was 24 and running the register, and she had a laugh that made 3 other people look up. They were married 14 months later. Their son Arliss was born when Marlin was 34, and Marlin missed the birth by 9 days and has a photograph of the boy at 4 days old that a nurse took and that he looked at approximately 9,000 times in a plywood room in Helmand. It would be easy, from out here, to make Adele Coldiron a villain from the first frame, and it would also be lazy and wrong, and getting her right is the only way the rest of this makes sense. For the first 9 years, that marriage was good in the specific way that military marriages are good when they work, heavily front-loaded with absence and heavily compensated for on the back end. Marlin was gone. He was gone for the first birthday and the third birthday and every other Christmas. Adele ran a house and a child and a part-time job at the marina office alone, and she did it well, and she did not complain in a way that showed. She also spent every one of those years inside a family business that she had been raised to understand was the same thing as the family. Her whole childhood was the sound of a compressor on a dock. When her father said "we handle it," the "we" included her, and it always had, since she was 11 and running the fuel pump. The thing that broke her was not greed. Nobody in this story got rich. Wingfield Marine Recovery grossed about $400,000 a year and cleared maybe 70. What broke her was March of 2009, when she was 25, and her brother came into the office at 6 in the morning and would not look at her, and her father closed a door. Nobody told her anything. She has been extremely consistent about this. Nobody ever told her anything. She simply typed what she was handed, for 16 years, and the first year she typed it she was 25, and by the time she was 41 it was not a thing she had done, it was a thing she was. That is not a defense. She helped stage a drowning for her own child. But it is a mechanism, and mechanisms are worth understanding, because more people end up inside one than ever choose one. Adele's father was Ardell Wingfield, and by the time Marlin married into that family, Ardell was already the most quietly important man in Netherton County, and nobody outside the county had ever heard of him. Ardell Wingfield owned Wingfield Marine Recovery. Here is what that means, and this is the part where you should start paying attention, because this is the machine. When a boat sinks, somebody has to go get it. When a car goes off a boat ramp, somebody has to go get it. When a person drowns, somebody has to go find the body, and it is not the sheriff, because the sheriff of a rural county does not have a dive team, or a side-scan sonar unit, or a $50,000 recovery barge with an A-frame crane on the back. So the county contracts it out. For 29 years, every underwater search, every vehicle recovery, every drowning, and every insurance survey on Waddington Lake had gone through Ardell Wingfield's company. He held the county contract. He held the contract in 2 adjoining counties. He was on a first-name basis with 3 sheriffs, 4 insurance adjusters, the utilities dam operations manager, and every judge in the district. He owned the sonar. He owned the boats. He owned the divers. And, hold on to this one, he owned the maps. Because here is a thing almost nobody knows about underwater searching. When a dive team searches a body of water, they produce a record, a grid, and a status for each square. Searched, not searched, obstructed, and the one that matters, clear. Clear means we ran this square and there is nothing in it. Every subsequent search anybody ever runs on that lake starts by pulling the previous search records, because you do not spend $40,000 rerunning squares somebody already cleared. The map is inherited. It compounds. A square marked clear in 2009 is still clear in 2027 unless somebody has a specific reason to doubt it. For 29 years, one man decided which squares on Waddington Lake were clear. And in June, for Arliss Coldiron's 9th birthday, his father, who was in the last months of his last enlistment and who had been buying his son things that would keep him busy and outdoors, bought him a $129 castable fish finder. A little yellow ball on a length of braided line. You throw it off a dock, you reel it in slowly, and it Bluetooths a crude sonar picture of the bottom to a phone. It is a toy. It is genuinely a toy. It is also, functionally, a sonar. Marlin had shown him how to read it on the second night, the two of them sitting on the end of the dock at Bardsley Landing with the phone between them, and he had explained the one thing that makes sonar make sense, which is that you are not looking at objects, you are looking at hardness. Soft mud comes back weak. Rock comes back hard. Wood comes back hard with a shape. And metal comes back hard, and flat, and wrong. Arliss Coldiron was 9 years old, and he had a system and a spiral notebook, because he was that kind of kid. And over 11 weeks he threw that yellow ball off the end of the family dock about 400 times, in a fan pattern, and he drew what he found, and he numbered them. He found 17 things. 16 of them were stumps, a sunken John boat, a refrigerator, and a shopping cart. The 17th one he drew on the 9th of September, and under the drawing, in the handwriting of a 9-year-old, he wrote, Number 17. Big and flat, 4 boxes. Like a car? Marlin Coldiron landed in Nashville at 9:40 that Saturday morning, and was at Quillian Regional by 11:15, and the first thing he did was not look for his son. The first thing he did was look at his brother. He does not apologize for that, and when I understood why, it reorganized this whole story for me. Webb was in the surgical ICU, intubated, sedated, post-op, and the family's job in that room was to sit and wait. Marlin did not sit. He stood at the foot of the bed for 11 minutes and read his brother like a chart. 2 entry wounds, one in the left upper chest, one in the abdomen, right of midline. He read the trajectories off the drain placement and the dressings. He read the surgical note over a nurse's shoulder, a nurse named Marvel Ashcraft who, to her enormous credit, let him, and he read the words small caliber, low velocity, retained fragments. And Marlin Coldiron said, out loud, to nobody, that's a 22. Which is not a small detail. It is the biggest detail in the first act of this story. Because a man defending a dock at midnight against an intruder shoots the gun he keeps at the dock. And what Ardell Wingfield kept on his recovery barge, in a bracket, and had kept there for 20 years, was a 12 gauge for cottonmouths. A .22 is not a defense gun. A .22 at close range is a quiet gun. A .22 is what you carry when the entire point is that nobody on that lake hears anything at midnight. Webb had not been shot by a man who was startled. Webb had been shot by a man who had already decided, before he walked down that ramp, that if anybody saw the boat that night, that person was going to have to stop existing quietly. Marlin walked out of that ICU at 11:41 a.m., and by then he was no longer a father who had lost a son. He was a medic walking onto a scene. The search command post was in the gravel lot at the Bardsley Landing ramp, and it had been running for 2 days, and it had the specific atmosphere of a search that everyone has privately given up on, and nobody will say so. There was a Netherton County Sheriff's Department pop-up canopy. There were 2 Twara officers. There were about 40 volunteers in fluorescent vests with paper cups. There was a laminated map of the lake on an easel, with grid squares drawn on it in marker, and roughly 2/3 of the squares had a diagonal line through them. And there was, tied to the courtesy dock, a 42-foot aluminum recovery barge with a yellow A-frame crane on the stern and Wingfield Marine Recovery on the side in blue letters. Sheriff Delford Stroop met Marlin at his truck, and he was not a villain, and I want to be fair to him, because being fair to him is the point of this section. Delford Stroop was 58. He had been sheriff for 11 years. He had 11 deputies for a county of 19,000 people, and he was doing exactly what every rural sheriff in America does when a child goes missing on a large body of water, which is that he called the one outfit in the county that had the equipment, and he let them run it. He put his hand on Marlin's shoulder, and he told him the following things, in this order. That Arliss's kayak had been found Wednesday morning against the riprap at the dam end, upside down, 5 miles from the family dock. That his life jacket had been found floating a 1/4 mile from the kayak. That the dive team had run the drift model and searched the primary probability area and the secondary and had cleared it. And that they were now, and he was sorry to have to say this, in a recovery posture rather than a rescue posture. Marlin asked him one question. He asked it quietly, and he asked it without any edge in it at all, and Sheriff Strope would testify later that it was the moment he first felt something turn over in his stomach. Marlin said, "Who ran the drift model?" Stroop said Ardell had. Ardell had run every drift model on that lake for 30 years. And Marlin said, "Sheriff, his life jacket was found floating." Stroop said yes. And Marlin said, "I taught that boy to buckle a jacket when he was 5. I have watched him do it 400 times. He does the crotch strap first because I made him do the crotch strap first. And I made him do the crotch strap first because a jacket without a crotch strap comes off over a child's head. If Arliss went in the water wearing that jacket is still on him. A floating jacket means it was never buckled. A jacket that was never buckled was put in the water by a person." There was a silence in that gravel lot. Then Marlin said the second thing, and this is the sentence the sheriff repeated on a witness stand 14 months later. He said, "And nobody has asked me what the water temperature is." He walked over to the easel with the laminated map on it, and he looked at the grid, and he counted, and then he stood there long enough that people started watching him. Because there were 4 squares in the middle of that map that had no line through them at all. They were not marked searched, they were not marked cleared, they were blank, and they had a small notation in the corner of each one in a neat hand. Arch, no entry. Archaeological, no entry. The 4 squares over the drowned town of Pentecost. Now I have to teach you the thing the entire back half of this story runs on, and I promise it is worth it, because most people have it exactly backwards, and having it backwards kills children every year. Here is the wrong belief. A person who goes into the water and does not come out within a few minutes is dead, and after a couple of hours it is a body recovery. That is true in warm water. It is spectacularly, dramatically untrue in cold water. And the colder the water is, the more untrue it gets. Cold water does 3 things to a human body, and the first 2 will kill you, and the third one can save you. The first thing is cold shock. In water under about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, the first 60 seconds are the most dangerous 60 seconds. You gasp involuntarily, a huge, uncontrollable inhalation, and if your face is underwater when it happens, that is the entire story, in 1 second, and the water temperature never gets a chance to help you. Most cold water drownings happen in the first minute, not the last. The second thing is swim failure. Between about 3 and 30 minutes, the muscles in your arms and legs cool and simply stop working. Not get tired. Stop. People have drowned 20 feet from a ladder with their heads above water the entire time, fully conscious, because their hands would not close. But the third thing is the reason this story has an ending. The third thing is that a cooled body needs almost nothing. Metabolism roughly halves for every 18 degrees Fahrenheit the core temperature drops. A brain at 90 degrees burns a fraction of the oxygen a brain at 98.6 burns. This is not folk medicine. It is why cardiac surgeons deliberately chill patients to stop the heart. In emergency medicine, there is a saying that every 18 delta, every flight medic and every ER doctor in a cold climate knows by heart. Nobody is dead until they are warm and dead. There is a documented case of a toddler pulled from an icy creek after 66 minutes underwater who walked out of the hospital. There is a case of a woman whose core temperature reached 56 degrees and who came back with no neurological deficit. And in the specific case in front of Marlin Coldiron, the boy had never been submerged at all because his life jacket had never been buckled, because his kayak had been carried 5 miles and thrown against the riprap by 2 adults in a boat at midnight. So the question was not how long can a child survive underwater. The question was, how long can a 9-year-old, 94 pounds, last seen in a long-sleeve shirt and shorts, survive on land, in the open, at night, at an average low of 44 degrees, wet? And the answer to that question is not a number, it is a condition. He survives as long as he stays out of the wind and out of the water and does not move much, which is precisely, word for word, what his father had taught him. Marlin had told him 3 times, on that dock, because Marlin taught things 3 times. He said, if you are ever on this lake and something goes wrong, do not swim for shore. Get up on the highest hard thing you can reach, get out of the wind, and stay put, because I will come, and I will not be able to find you if you are moving." Marlin stood in that gravel lot and looked at 4 blank squares on a laminated map, and the top 9 feet of a brick bell tower stood in the middle of them, at Winter Pool, 60 feet from where a boy's own sonar drawing said something big and flat with 4 boxes was lying on the bottom. And he did not say a word to anybody about it, and that decision, to say nothing, to that sheriff, in that lot, in front of that barge, is the smartest thing anyone does in this entire story. Because Ardell Wingfield was standing 40 feet away, drinking coffee out of a company mug, and Ardell Wingfield had been watching him look at the map. At 4:50 that afternoon, Marlin Coldiron did 4 things, none of which involved the search command post. He drove to a marine supply in Quillian and bought a handheld sonar, a thermometer, a dry bag, 2 chemical heat blankets, and a coil of 1/2-inch line. He drove to his brother's house and took Webb's old aluminum boat, which had a 15-horse tiller outboard and no lights, and which Ardell Wingfield had never once looked at in 20 years. He called a number in Kentucky and got a woman named Sindra Vandergraff, who ran a 2-person hydrographic survey company that mapped lake bottoms for engineering firms, and he asked her what it would cost to survey 4 grid squares of a Tennessee reservoir starting Monday morning, and he did not tell her why, and she quoted him $11,000, and he said yes before she finished the sentence. And then he did the 4th thing, which was that he went and sat in his truck in the dark at the far end of the lot and waited until 8:40 p.m., when Wingfield Marine Recovery shut down for the night, and the barge went quiet, and Ardell Wingfield and his son Clovis walked up the ramp to a white pickup. And Marlin watched his wife walk out to meet them. Adele Coldiron had been at that command post for 2 days. She had been photographed crying. She had been photographed being held up by 2 women. She had given an interview to a Nashville station on Thursday in which she said the words, "Please, if anybody has seen him," and she had said them well. She met her father in the dark at the top of the ramp, and Marlin, watching from 90 yards with a set of binoculars he had owned since 2009, watched his wife of 13 years put her hand flat on her father's chest and lean in and say something short. And then he watched her look, deliberately, over her shoulder, at the 4 blank squares of water where the steeple was. He put the binoculars down. He would say later, in the only interview he has ever given about this, that the 11 seconds after that were the worst 11 seconds of his life, worse than any minute of any deployment, because in those 11 seconds, he understood the entire thing at once. And the thing he understood was this: they did not know where Arliss was either. They were not holding him. They were looking for him. They had been looking for him for 4 days, and they could not go look in the one place a person would actually look, because the one place was inside 4 grid squares that Ardell Wingfield himself had spent 9 years telling every agency in the state were off limits. He had built the perfect blind spot, and his grandson had walked into it. Marlin Coldiron put a boat in the water at 10:20 that night from a bank 1.5 miles from the ramp, and he ran across Waddington Lake with no navigation lights at idle speed for 51 minutes. He did not go straight to the steeple. He is not the man who goes straight at a thing. He shut the motor off 400 yards out and paddled, and he sat there for 6 minutes in the dark and listened, and then he did the thing that he had come to do, which was that he put the thermometer over the side. 51 degrees Fahrenheit. Air temperature, 46. Wind out of the northwest at 8. He ran the numbers he had run 100 times for 100 other people. 94-pound boy. Wet on entry, most likely. Then dry. Out of the water. Out of the wind if he had any sense. And he had been taught to have sense. No food since Tuesday. 4 nights. The answer he got was, yes. Thin, and getting thinner every hour, and he would not be conscious. And there was a real chance the heart had already gone into a rhythm that a person who did not know better would call death. But, yes. He paddled the last 400 yards. The Pentecost Bell Tower at Winter Pool is a brick shaft about 11 feet on a side, and what stands above the water is the belfry, the open arch top where the bell used to hang, and a rotted timber platform inside it about 4 feet down from the arches. Marlin came alongside at 11:29 p.m., and he did not call out. He turned on a red-lensed headlamp, because white light kills your night vision, and because a red light does not carry across water, and he put it up into the nearest arch. And on the platform, wedged into the corner where two brick walls met, out of the wind, under a rotting canvas tarp that had been part of a boat cover in 1974, was his son. Arliss Coldiron was gray. His lips were the color of a bruise. He was not shivering, which is the sign that terrifies people who know what it means, because shivering is the body fighting, and the shivering stops when the fight is over. His pupils were sluggish. His jaw was locked. Marlin got a hand on his neck and held it there for a full 60 seconds, which is not what you do in a warm patient, and is exactly what you do in a cold one, because a hypothermic pulse can be so slow and so thin that 10 seconds of feeling for it will tell you a living child is dead. At 41 seconds, he felt it, somewhere around 28 beats a minute. And Master Sergeant Marlin Coldiron, who had put 4 black tags on 4 men behind a compound wall in Kandahar, put his forehead down on the wet brick of a drowned church for about 3 seconds. Then he went to work. What he did over the next 2 hours is, medically, the entire reason I wanted to tell you this story, because almost everything an ordinary well-meaning person would have done would have killed that boy in the first 10 minutes. He did not rub the boy's arms. Rubbing drives cold blood from the limbs into the core and can stop the heart. He did not give him anything to drink. He did not stand him up. He did not sit him up. A severely hypothermic body cannot regulate blood pressure, and moving them upright can drop it to nothing. This is a real, named phenomenon that has killed people who had already been rescued. He cut the boy's clothes off with trauma shears rather than pulling them, because pulling means moving, and moving a cold heart in that state can put it into ventricular fibrillation. He got him horizontal on the floor of the boat on 2 closed-cell foam pads, because the ground steals more heat than the air does. He put the chemical blankets on his chest, and his armpits, and his groin, not his hands and feet. He wrapped the whole thing, boy, blankets, pads, in a plastic tarp with the head covered and the face open. And then he ran that boat across Waddington Lake at 11 miles an hour instead of 30, all the way in, because every wave that boat slammed into was a jolt through a heart that was one bad jolt from stopping. It took him 58 minutes to cover water he could have covered in 19. He called it in at 12:04 a.m. on the marine radio, in the clear, on Channel 16, so that every boat, every marina, and every scanner in Netherton County heard it at the same moment, which was deliberate, and which is the second smartest thing he does in this story. He said, "Mayday, Mayday, Netherton County, this is a private vessel inbound to Quillian City Dock. I have a 9-year-old male, severe hypothermia, core estimated below 86, pulse 28, recovered alive from the Pentecost Tower. Repeat, recovered alive. I need an ALS unit, and I need them to call ahead for ECMO." Arliss Coldiron's core temperature at the emergency department at Quillian Regional was 84.9 degrees Fahrenheit. He was transferred to Vanderbilt. He was rewarmed over 11 hours. He woke up on Monday morning and the first thing he said, to a nurse he had never met, was, "Is my dad here?" He had frostbite on 2 toes and he kept both of them. He had no neurological deficit at all. And on Monday afternoon, when a detective from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation named Winifred Lockridge sat down beside his bed with a notebook and asked him, very gently, what he remembered, Arliss Coldiron, who was 9 and who had been raised by a man who taught things 3 times, said, "I want to tell it in order. Can I start on Tuesday? Here is what happened on Tuesday," in the order he told it, and Detective Lockridge said afterward, it was the single cleanest child witness statement she had taken in 19 years. On Tuesday afternoon, Arliss took his fish finder to the family dock and did his fan pattern and got a return he had never seen. He drew it. He labeled it 17. He wrote, "Big and flat, 4 boxes." "Like a car?" He was excited because he was 9 and because his father had told him, "You photograph a thing that matters." He had no camera. What he had was a phone with a screenshot button, and he took 4 screenshots. And then, and this is the part that made a grown detective put her pen down, he did what his dad had taught him about anything important, which was tell a grown-up. He went up to the house and he showed his grandfather. Ardell Wingfield looked at 4 screenshots on a 9-year-old's phone showing a hard, flat, 4-box return in 61 feet of water, 300 yards off the Coldiron dock, which is a square his own company had marked clear in 2011. And he told his grandson that it was a sunken pontoon and that it was old news, and he ruffled the boy's hair, and he asked, casually, whether Arliss had shown anybody else. And Arliss, being 9, said, "Not yet. I'm going to show Uncle Webb because he knows about cars." That sentence is why Wilburn Coldiron got shot. What Arliss did next is the part where a 9-year-old outthinks 3 adults. He did not like the way his grandfather asked the question. He did not have words for why. He said later, in a courtroom, in the plainest sentence in the entire trial transcript, he asked it like it was nothing, but he stopped chewing. So he took his phone and he walked down to the dock and he put it in a Ziploc bag inside the dry hatch of his kayak, because that was where he kept things he did not want his mother to find. And on Tuesday evening he heard his mother and his grandfather in the boathouse. He did not hear all of it. He heard 3 fragments, and he repeated all 3 to Detective Lockridge, and all 3 were later corroborated. He heard his grandfather say the Duplessis girl. He heard his mother say he's 9, he'll forget it in a week. And he heard his grandfather say he doesn't forget anything. That's the problem. He's exactly like his father. Arliss Coldiron took his kayak out at 8:40 on Tuesday evening, in the dark, which he had been forbidden to do, and he paddled 2.5 miles to the drowned town of Pentecost, because it was the only place on that lake he was certain no adult would come, and because he had been told to stay away from it his entire life, and because he was 9, and he was scared, and it was the only plan he had. He climbed up into the belfry. He tied his kayak to the arch with a bad knot. Sometime in the night the kayak came loose and went with the wind, and that is the whole accident. There was no abduction. Nobody took him. A 9-year-old made one good decision and one bad knot, and it cost him 4 nights and very nearly his life. And it also, this is the part that keeps me up, it also saved him, because if Arliss Coldiron had been in that house on Wednesday morning, we would be telling a completely different story. The Wingfields spent Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday running a search of a lake with a hole in the middle of it, hoping to find a boy they could not afford to have found by anybody else, and staging the accident they needed while they did it. The kayak against the riprap, the unbuckled life jacket, the drift model. And on Friday night, Wilburn Coldiron, 61, who had spent 2 days thinking about a phone call his nephew had made him about a car on a sonar, walked down to the Bardsley landing ramp at 11:30 at night to look at what his in-laws were loading onto a boat under a spotlight. The thing they were loading was a 200-pound concrete mooring block and 40 feet of chain. Because they had decided that if they found the boy first, he was going to be found the way the lake finds people. I said at the top that everything turns on the water temperature, and I meant it, but there is a second thing this story turns on, and it is the word clear. Sindra Vandergraaf's survey boat put in at Bardsley Landing at 7:10 on Monday morning with a paid invoice, a permit, and a side-scan sonar unit worth more than the barge tied up 60 feet away, and by Monday night, she had run all 4 of the Pentecost squares, plus a 2,000-yard buffer, and on Tuesday, she extended it because of what she found, and by the following Friday, she had run 410 acres of Waddington Lake bottom. She found 11 vehicles. 9 of them were in squares that Wingfield Marine Recovery had marked clear. I want to be very careful here, because most of those 11 cars were nothing. 4 of them were stolen cars dumped for insurance in the 80s. 2 were farm trucks that went through the ice. 1 was a car that had been reported to the county in 2016 and never recovered because the recovery was quoted at $9,000 and the family could not pay it. But 3 of them had people in them. A 2004 Pontiac Grand Am, 310 yards off the Coldiron dock, in 61 feet of water, in a square marked clear in 2011, contained the remains of Bernice Duplessis, who was 27 years old when she was last seen leaving a job at a distribution center in Quillian on the 9th of March 2009, and whose brother Rayford had filed a missing persons report every single year on the anniversary for 16 years and had been told every single year that the lake had been searched. Bernice Duplessis had a fractured hyoid bone. That is not a drowning injury. That is a strangulation injury. She was in that car, but she did not drive into that lake alive. And the reason that car sat 300 yards off a dock for 16 years in a square marked clear by the man who did the marking is that in 2009, Ardell Wingfield's 28-year-old son Clovis had been the last person seen with Bernice Duplessis and had been interviewed once and had been released. Ardell Wingfield never planned a criminal enterprise. Nothing about this was that organized. What Ardell Wingfield did in the spring of 2009 was type one word into one field on one county form. And then he spent 16 years defending it. He defended it by keeping the contract. He defended it by keeping the sonar in his own hands. He defended it by getting the Pentecost squares designated no entry in 2016, which took one letter on his letterhead, citing the archaeological significance of a 19th century church, and which the State Historical Commission approved without ever sending anybody to look. And on a Tuesday in September, his 9-year-old grandson threw a $129 yellow ball off a dock and reeled it back in. There was one more thing on Sindra Vandergraaf's sonar record, and it did not come from the sonar at all. It came from a 33-year-old man named Herschel Bidwell, who had dived for Wingfield Marine Recovery for 6 years and who called the TBI tip line himself on the Wednesday after Arliss came out of the tower. Herschel Bidwell was not a whistleblower and did not want to be one. He was a diver in a county with 2 employers. What he had was an itch he had never scratched, and the itch was this. 3 times in 6 years, Ardell had personally run a specific square himself, alone, at night, on the barge, with the crew sent home, and had entered the result in the morning. That is not how you search. Search diving is a 2-diver operation, with a tender, always, everywhere, for the obvious reason. Bidwell had assumed for 6 years that the old man was doing insurance work he did not want to pay a crew for. He said, in his statement, the sentence that a lot of people in this story could have said, and only he actually did. I never thought he was hiding a body. I thought he was hiding a bill. So I never asked. His 3 dates lined up with 3 squares. 2 of the 3 had cars in them. Marlin Coldiron could have handed all of it to Detective Lockridge on Monday and gone home, and it would have ended the same way in court. And I want to be honest with you, it probably should have. He did not do that. What he did instead is the part of this story that people argue about, and I am going to tell it to you straight and let you decide. On the second Saturday in December, with the lake at Winter Pool, with charges not yet filed because the TBI was still building the case, and with Ardell Wingfield out on his barge doing what he had done every winter for 29 years, running the drawdown survey, Marlin Coldiron took his brother's aluminum boat out to the Pentecost Tower. He waited until the Wingfield barge came into the 4 squares. He knew it would, because he had put an anonymous call into the TBI tip line on Thursday, saying that evidence had been dumped at the tower, and he knew exactly what a man with a guilty map would do with that information, which is come look before anybody else did. Ardell Wingfield, Clovis Wingfield, and Adele Coldiron came into the Pentecost squares at 4:15 in the afternoon in a 42-foot barge, and they anchored, and Ardell and Clovis went in on hookah rigs, and Adele stayed topside to tend the lines. At 4:40, Marlin Coldiron came alongside in a boat with no lights, stepped onto the barge, took the ignition key, took the spare, took the marine radio's fuse, took both cell phones out of the dry box, and cut the hookah compressor's fuel line. Then he sat down on the gunwale and waited for 2 men to surface. There is a photograph of what he did next, because the TBI recovered it from the barge's own dash camera, which Ardell Wingfield had installed himself in 2019 to protect against insurance claims. Marlin Coldiron had 4 triage tags. They are a real thing you can buy. Heavy waterproof cardstock on elastic. Red, yellow, green, black. Used at mass casualty incidents everywhere in the world. He put a green tag on Clovis Wingfield's wrist and told him what green means. You can walk. You're fine. Nobody's coming for you first. You get to sit here and watch. He put a yellow tag on Adele. Delayed. You will survive this. It is going to take longer than you want. He put a red tag on Ardell Wingfield. Immediate. And he explained, in the same flat voice he had used on a phone with a state trooper at 3 in the morning, that red does not mean the worst. Red means the one where what happens next actually changes the outcome. Red means, you are the one I am going to spend everything on. And then he took the fourth tag, the black one, and he did not put it on anybody. He hung it from the anchor line, at the water line, where the top of the Pentecost bell tower stood 9 feet out of 51-degree water, and he said one sentence. He said, "Black is the one you walk past. Bernice Duplessis has been wearing that one for 16 years because you wrote a word on a map." And then he sat there, in his boat, 30 feet off the barge, for 4 hours and 10 minutes, in the dark, while 3 people in wetsuits and 1 woman in a fleece got colder and colder on an aluminum deck in December, with no engine, no radio, no phones, and no heat. He did not touch them. He did not threaten them. He answered every question they screamed at him with a number: the air temperature, the water temperature, their core temperature estimate, and how long they had. He was, by all 3 of their later accounts, correct about all of it. At 8:50 p.m., when Clovis Wingfield stopped shivering, and Marlin knew exactly what that meant, because he is the only person on that barge who did, he stood up, restarted the compressor to run the barge's cabin heater, put the fuse back in the radio, called the TBI himself, gave his position, waited, and then treated all 3 of them for mild to moderate hypothermia while they waited for the boat. Because that is the other half of the job, and the half people forget. The medic sorts, and then the medic treats everybody, including the ones he despises, because that is the whole point of the tag system. It is not a judgment about who deserves to live. It is arithmetic about who can still be saved. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation arrived at 9:40 p.m. and found 3 cold, uninjured people sitting under emergency blankets, wearing color-coded triage tags, on a barge with a black tag tied to the anchor line, and a retired Special Forces medic sitting on the gunwale with his hands where they could see them. Marlin Coldiron was charged with false imprisonment and criminal trespass. He pled guilty to both. He served 11 months. He has never once said he regrets it, and the only thing he has ever said publicly about it is, "They were never in danger. I was on that boat." Ardell Wingfield was convicted of second-degree murder as an accessory after the fact in the death of Bernice Duplessis, tampering with evidence, 16 counts of official misconduct, 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder for Wilburn Coldiron, and 1 count of aggravated child endangerment. He is 71. He was sentenced to 51 years. He will die in the Northwest Correctional Complex. Clovis Wingfield was convicted of the second-degree murder of Bernice Duplessis and sentenced to 40 years. The hyoid fracture did that. So did a text message he sent on the 10th of March 2009, which had been sitting in a carrier's archive the entire time and which nobody had ever asked for, because nobody had ever had a reason to. Adele Coldiron pled guilty to accessory after the fact, evidence tampering, and filing a false report. She got 9 years. In her allocution, she said the thing that I think is the truest sentence anybody says in this whole story, and it is not an excuse. It is just true. She said, "I did not decide to do this. I decided not to ask a question in 2009, and then every year after that the price of asking it went up." Wilburn Coldiron came off the ventilator on the 9th day and out of the hospital on the 51st. He is 62. He has a colostomy and a limp, and a standing Thursday breakfast with his nephew. Webb Coldiron came off the ventilator on a Sunday, and the first thing he did, before anybody could stop him, was write on a whiteboard with a marker taped into his fist. It took him 4 minutes, and the nurse said the handwriting was almost unreadable. It said, "Did you get him?" Marlin held up his phone with a photograph on it of a boy in a hospital bed at Vanderbilt with a red popsicle and 2 hands worth of monitor leads, and Webb Coldiron, 61 years old, 4 days off a table, with a chest tube in him, closed his eyes and cried without making any noise at all, which is the way men of that generation from that part of the country cry. Later, much later, in the spring, Marlin asked him the only question he had never asked, which was why he had walked down that ramp at 11:30 at night by himself instead of calling somebody. And Webb said, "Because if I'd have called somebody and been wrong, I'd have called your wife's daddy a killer in front of the whole county over a phone call from a 9-year-old. And Marlin said, "You'd have been right." And Webb said, "I'd have been right, but I didn't know that yet. That's the whole trick of it, ain't it? You never know it yet." The county contract for underwater search and recovery on Waddington Lake was rebid. The new contract has a clause in it, drafted by a state senator's staffer who read the case file over a weekend, and everybody in 3 counties calls it the Coldiron Clause. And what it says is this: no square may be marked clear by the same entity for more than 2 consecutive searches, and every 10 years, the county shall commission an independent survey by a firm with no local contracts. I want to spend a paragraph on Rayford Duplessis, because the arithmetic of his 16 years is the part of this that I cannot put down. He filed the first report on the 11th of March, 2009. He filed a supplemental report every year on the 9th of March after that. 16 reports. He kept copies of all of them in a manila envelope with a rubber band around it that had gone brittle and snapped and been replaced 4 times. He was told, in 2009, that the lake had been searched. He was told again in 2013. In 2016, he paid $2,200 of his own money. Money he did not have. Money he got by selling a truck for a private search. And the only outfit in 3 counties with the equipment to do it was Wingfield Marine Recovery. And he wrote the check to them, and they took it, and they ran the search, and they told him the lake was clear. He paid the man who put her there to look for her, twice, if you count the county's contract, which is public money, which is also his. When Detective Lockridge called him on a Thursday afternoon in December to tell him they had found a 2004 Pontiac, he did not say anything for a long time, and then he asked her one question, which was whether the car was far out. She said 310 yards off a private dock, and Rayford Duplessis said, "I've fished off that point. I have sat in a boat on top of my sister and eaten a sandwich." 6 families got answers. Rayford Duplessis buried his sister in April, 16 years and 1 month after she went missing, and he asked Marlin Coldiron to be a pallbearer, and Marlin said no, and asked instead if he could ride in the boat that scattered nothing, that carried nobody, that just went out to that square of water and sat there for an hour, which is what they did. And Arliss Coldiron is 10 now. He still has the fish finder. His father takes him out on the lake most Saturdays and they run transects, actual transects, with a grid and a notebook, because Arliss asked to, and they file what they find with the county, and they have filed 11 reports, and the county has acted on all 11. He is not afraid of the water. That is the thing everybody asks, and the answer surprises them. He is not afraid of the water, and he is not afraid of the dark, and he does not have nightmares about the tower. What he does have is a rule, which he made up himself, and which he tells anybody who will listen, and which his father says is better than anything he ever taught him. Arliss Coldiron says, "If a grown-up asks you who else you told, tell somebody else immediately." I want to close on the tags, because I have not been able to stop thinking about them. The triage system exists because of a specific and brutal insight. In a disaster, the natural human instinct, help the person screaming loudest, help the person you love, help the one in front of you, kills more people than it saves. So somebody has to walk the line and sort, and the sorting question is not who is hurt worst, and it is not who deserves it. The question is only ever this: who can I still change the outcome for? That is a medical question, and it is also, if you turn it slightly, the question this whole story was hiding. For 16 years, an entire county's worth of good, well-meaning, non-criminal people looked at Waddington Lake and did not ask it. The sheriff did not ask it, because he had a contractor. The State Historical Commission did not ask it, because they had a letter. 4 insurance adjusters did not ask it, because they had a survey. Every one of them accepted a map somebody else had drawn, and none of them ever asked the one question you should ask about any map, any report, any all clear, any, we already looked into that. Who drew this, and what did it cost them to draw it that way? That is the takeaway, and I want to make it practical, because I hate a takeaway you cannot use. Every one of us inherits maps, a background check somebody else ran, an inspection somebody else signed, a we investigated and found nothing, a relative who says don't worry about that, I handled it. Almost all of them are fine. But the one that is not fine will always be the one drawn by the person who had the most to lose from what was in that square. And that is a thing you can actually check in about 10 minutes before you accept the map. And the last thing, if a child brings you something they found, a screenshot, a bruise, A story that does not fit. Do not ask them who else they told. Ask them who else you should tell. Ardell Wingfield asked the first question, in a kitchen, with his hand on a 9-year-old's head, and he stopped chewing while he asked it. That boy noticed, and then he did the bravest, most ordinary thing in this entire story, which was that he believed himself.